I was 62 years old when I learned the truth in the cruelest way possible. My name is Lorraine Carter, and I had spent 3 decades building a life inside the little brick house on the east side of Detroit. That house was where I raised my daughter Tasha, cooked gumbo every Sunday for my late husband Henry, and where I worked double shifts as a nurse and a janitor just to keep the mortgage paid. One cold November night when the wind rattled the windows and the radiator hissed like an angry kettle, I heard voices drifting down the hallway. I paused in the dark, holding my breath, and what I heard made my blood run ice cold. Tasha's voice was low, but sharp, the way she always sounded when she was plotting something. "Mama is old now," she whispered to her husband Marcus over the phone. "She is just taking up space. If we move her into the nursing home by Christmas, we can list the house immediately." Marcus chuckled, his tone dripping with greed. "At 300,000 on the market, that is a fresh start for us, and she will not be around to argue." I stood frozen by the door, one hand gripping the frame so tightly my knuckles ached. My own daughter was planning to throw me away like yesterday's trash. The air smelled of fried onions from dinner still sitting cold on the stove, but suddenly everything tasted like ashes. Memories of Henry flashed through me, him painting the porch rail white, him dying in the upstairs bedroom where I sat holding his hand. He had promised me the house would always be mine. My knees trembled, but I forced myself not to make a sound. The betrayal felt like a knife in the back. I remembered every sacrifice selling Henry's old Ford to cover Tasha's tuition walking home in snow after a 12-hour hospital shift holding her baby clothes when she was sick with pneumonia. I had given everything, yet now she called me a burden. I heard Marcus again, his voice sharper. "She will not fight back. She is weak, and besides, the paperwork is almost ready. By next month, we will be living in that house as if it was ours all along." My heart hammered so loudly I feared they would hear it. Sweat slid down my back even though the room was cold. I wanted to scream, to storm in and confront them, but something inside me said no, wait, listen, gather every word. They thought I was asleep upstairs. They thought I was too tired, too worn down to resist. Marcus's laugh was like sandpaper. "She has no idea. When we sign the papers, she will be out of the picture for good." In that moment, fear turned into fury. I whispered inside my chest, almost hearing Henry's voice urging me on. "Do not let them take what we built. The house was my fortress, my memory, my blood. Tasha thought it was hers already, but she was wrong. That house still carried my name, and so did my dignity." My fists clenched, and I swore silently that I would not go quietly. They wanted me gone, but I was still standing, still breathing, and still holding power they did not know about. As I tiptoed back to my room, the floorboards creaked under my bare feet. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow sharper. I closed the door slowly, my hands trembling. The betrayal had shattered something inside me, but at the same time it had lit a fire I thought was long gone. They believed I was helpless, but they had underestimated me. I stared at Henry's framed photo on the nightstand, and for the first time in years I did not cry. Instead, I whispered to him in the dark, "They think I am finished, Henry, but they are about to learn I am not dead yet." The next morning, the kitchen smelled of burnt toast and bitter coffee. I sat at the table with my hands wrapped tight around a chipped mug, not because I was drinking, but because I needed something to keep me from shaking. Tasha walked in wearing her silk robe, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. Marcus trailed behind her, his heavy boots thudding against the linoleum. I stared at them both, my chest tight, my pulse racing. Finally, I said low but steady, "I heard you last night. I heard every word." Tasha froze for a split second, then pasted on a smile too sweet to be real. "Mama, you must have misheard. We were just worried about you," she said, her eyes darting to Marcus. He smirked and dropped his keys on the table so hard, the sound made me flinch. "You are too old to be rattling around in this house alone, Lorraine. It is time to be realistic." The words cut like knives. Too old, too useless. I pushed the mug away and stood up my chair, scraping the floor. "I worked 2 jobs for 20 years to keep this house. I buried your father here. Do you think you can just erase me?" My voice cracked, but the fire in my chest only grew hotter. Marcus stepped closer, his breath heavy with the stench of beer, even though it was barely 9 in the morning. He leaned down so his face was inches from mine. "You are a burden, Lorraine. Stop clinging to this place." His hand slammed on the table, making the mug tip over and spill cold coffee across my lap. Tasha said nothing, just folded her arms and stared, her eyes hard as stone. The humiliation made my throat burn. I grabbed a dish towel to wipe myself, but Marcus yanked it from my hands and tossed it aside. His voice rose sharp and cruel. "You cannot even hold a cup without spilling it. What kind of life is that?" My knees weakened, but I forced myself to stand tall. My palms were sweating, my body trembling, yet I refused to sit back down. I looked straight into Tasha's eyes. "Do you remember the winter of 2009 when you could not pay tuition and I sold Henry's car to cover the bill? Do you remember me walking through snow with holes in my shoes just so you could have your graduation gown?" She looked away, lips pressed tight, refusing to answer. Marcus chuckled under his breath, and that laugh made something snap inside me. I slammed my hand down on the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen. "This house is mine. Your father's blood is in these walls. You will not take it from me." My voice shook but rang with a clarity that startled even me. Marcus's eyes narrowed, and then he shoved me backward toward the chair. My back hit the wood pane shooting through my ribs. I gasped, clutching my side while Tasha stood frozen, watching without lifting a finger. The betrayal was sharper than the physical pain. My own daughter, the child I once held against my chest when she had fevers, now stared at me like a stranger. She whispered, "Mama, do not make this harder than it has to be." Her voice was flat, rehearsed, as if she had already buried me in her mind. I staggered to my feet, my body shaking, and retreated down the hallway to my bedroom. I locked the door with trembling fingers, my breath ragged. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman with graying hair, tear tracks on her cheeks, and fury burning in her eyes. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching Henry's photo. His smile in that picture felt like a shield. I could almost hear his voice. "Do not surrender, Lorraine. Not now." That night, lying awake while the house creaked around me, I realized something. They saw me as weak, but they were wrong. They believed I was powerless, but they had no idea of the strength still left in me. My body ached, my heart felt shattered, yet my mind was sharper than ever. I whispered into the darkness, "Let them try. I will not go quietly." When dawn broke the next day, I sat by the window staring out at the frost curling across the glass. The city was waking up, cars crunching down the icy street, neighbors shuffling to work. I thought about how many mornings I had done the same, how many years I had woken before sunrise pulling on scrubs or a janitor's uniform heading out into the cold. My life had been a chain of long shifts and aching feet, but I never complained because I was building a future for Tasha. I met Henry when I was 22. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, a mechanic who smelled of grease and coffee, the kind of man who worked with his hands and kept his promises. We bought this house when Tasha was only 3 years old, a little brick 2-bedroom with peeling paint and a squeaky front door. Henry would come home from the shop, his fingernails blackened with oil, and still find the energy to patch the roof or paint the porch rail. I worked evenings at the hospital cleaning floors, sometimes 12 hours straight, my knees swelling under the weight of exhaustion. Still, I came home to tuck Tasha in, reading her bedtime stories with aching eyes, whispering to her about dreams that one day she would go further than I ever could. There were winters so harsh I remember stuffing newspaper in my shoes because the soles were worn through. I would push grocery carts down frozen sidewalks, my fingers numb, just to bring home enough food. Tasha never knew we were poor because I refused to let her feel it. I kept the lights on the heat running, even if it meant skipping meals myself. Once in 1998, when Henry's hours were cut, I worked nights at a diner wiping tables until 2 a.m., and then reported for my hospital shift at 7. I would splash cold water on my face in the bathroom just to stay awake. Every paycheck went straight to Bill's tuition funds and saving for her future. When Tasha reached college age, she chose a private university with tuition of nearly $58,000 for 4 years. I remember signing those loan papers with trembling hands. Henry and I sold his beloved Ford pickup to cover the first semester. I picked up extra shifts scrubbing floors until my fingers cracked, taking on private cleaning jobs in the neighborhood. Each envelope of cash I slid into her account felt like a small victory. I believed she would look back one day and see all I had poured into her. Her wedding in 2012 cost $18,000. I told her we could not afford it, but she cried, begged, and said she would be humiliated if her friends saw anything less than perfect. So I drained my small savings account, the one Henry and I had started for retirement, and handed it over. I watched her walk down the aisle in a silk gown that I paid for even as my own dress was bought secondhand. Marcus smiled that day smug, even then shaking my hand as if he was doing me a favor by taking her. I remember Henry whispering to me, "Something about that man is off. I should have listened harder." Then came the years after Henry died. I sat by his bedside in 2017 holding his hand while cancer hollowed him out. His last words to me were, "Lorraine, keep the house. It is yours. Promise me you will not let anyone push you out." I promised him with tears streaming down my cheeks, clutching his hand until the machines went silent. The funeral was small but filled with neighbors who knew how much he meant to the block. I stood alone afterward, holding the keys to the house, knowing I had to carry on. After Henry passed, I leaned on Tasha more, or at least I tried to. But she grew colder, sharper. She would roll her eyes when I reminded her of things Henry used to say. She began visiting less, calling less, until Marcus moved in, and her tone shifted from impatient to outright cruel. Little comments, small jabs. "Mama, you should not drive anymore." "Mama, maybe it is time to think about downsizing." "Mama, this house is too big for you." I thought it was concern at first, but then I saw the way Marcus's eyes scanned the living room, the kitchen, as if he was taking inventory. I ignored the warning signs because I could not bear to think my own child would betray me. I kept cooking Sunday meals, setting the table for them, even when they rarely showed up. I ironed Tasha's blouses when she dropped them off, smiled when Marcus brought over bills for me to co-sign. I thought I was helping. I thought I was still needed. Now remembering it all, the pieces fell into place like a cruel puzzle. Every sacrifice I had made, every dollar, every hour stolen from my body, it had all been twisted into entitlement. They did not see my love only opportunity. My sacrifices had built the roof over their heads, and yet they wanted me out of the picture. I sat on the edge of my bed that morning, staring at Henry's photo. My chest ached with grief, but beneath it pulsed a hard, hot current of anger. I had spent my life giving, and now they wanted to erase me. No, not this time. They thought I was a frail old woman, but I was still the same Lorraine who walked through snow with holes in her shoes, who worked 20-hour days, who buried her husband and stood tall at his grave. I was not done yet. The week after I overheard their conversation felt like living in a house with ghosts, except the ghosts were alive and plotting against me. Tasha and Marcus grew bolder, no longer hiding their disdain behind polite smiles. They began rearranging furniture without asking Marcus, talking loudly on the phone about open floor concepts and property value. I caught him taking photos of the living room one afternoon, pretending it was for insurance, but I saw the real estate app open on his phone screen when the reflection flashed across the glass cabinet. My chest tightened with rage, but I bit my tongue. I needed to know just how far they were willing to go. Tasha, meanwhile, began slipping subtle threats into ordinary conversations. One evening over dinner, she set her fork down and said, "Mama, you know memory loss runs in our family. Maybe you should get tested before things get worse." Her tone was syrupy, but her eyes were sharp. I knew exactly what she was implying. If she could paint me as incompetent, she could claim guardianship and then the house would be hers legally. I forced a laugh, though my stomach churned. "My mind is sharper than yours," I said quietly. She flinched, then changed the subject, but the message had landed. I would not go down easy. The real escalation came 3 days later. I found a thick envelope on the kitchen counter, papers clipped neatly inside. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Durable Power of Attorney." My name was printed on the signature line, and Marcus had highlighted the place where I was supposed to sign. My hands trembled as I read the clauses. If I signed, he would gain full control of my finances, my property, even medical decisions. It was a legal death sentence. I shoved the papers back into the envelope and stormed into the living room. "You think I am a fool?" I demanded. Marcus looked up from his laptop, his eyes cold. "This is for your protection, Lorraine," he said smoothly. Tasha stood behind him, arms crossed. "Mama, do not be dramatic. Everyone does this at your age." "My age." The words seared through me like acid. I tore the papers in half, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Marcus's jaw tightened, his smile vanishing. That was a mistake, he muttered. From then on, the atmosphere in the house turned poisonous. They stopped pretending to include me. Marcus locked doors when he left, whispered into his phone at night. Tasha began talking about the house as if I was already gone. "We can put the nursery here," she told Marcus, running her hands along the hallway wall. My blood boiled as I listened from the shadows. The gall of it, she was planning her future children's rooms in a house her father built with his bare hands, a house I was still paying property taxes on every year. Then came the physical intimidation. One night, I walked into the kitchen to find Marcus standing there in the dark, a beer bottle dangling from his fingers. He stepped close, so close I could smell the sourness of alcohol on his breath. "You are just a guest here, Lorraine," he said softly, almost kindly. "Guests eventually leave." He brushed past me, his shoulder knocking hard against mine, sending me stumbling into the counter. My ribs throbbed, but my pride hurt worse. That weekend, Tasha invited her cousin Keisha over. They sat at the table with Marcus whispering and shuffling more papers. I lingered in the hallway, straining to hear. I caught fragments: loan application, cosigner, fast approval. My stomach dropped. They were trying to put my name on another debt using my credit to line their pockets. When I entered the room, they fell silent. Keisha forced a smile. "Auntie, you look tired. Maybe you should rest." My eyes scanned the table, catching sight of my forged signature on a form. Fury surged through me. "You will not chain me with debt!" I snapped, snatching the papers and tearing them apart. Marcus leapt up, his face red. His hand shot out, gripping my wrist so tightly I gasped. "Sign or regret it," he hissed. For a moment, fear strangled me, but then something older and stronger pushed through. I wrenched my arm free and spat the words that burned on my tongue over my dead body. The silence that followed was thick and ugly. Tasha looked at me with a mixture of shock and contempt, as if she could not believe I dared to defy her. She slammed her hand on the table. "Mama, stop acting like you are the victim. You owe us. All those years we sacrificed too." My laugh came bitter and raw. "You sacrificed nothing," I said. "I carried you. Every dime, every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, it was me. And this house is mine." They stared at me, speechless for once, but I could see the calculation flickering in Marcus's eyes. He was already plotting his next move. That night, I lay awake, clutching Henry's photo, the shadows on the ceiling swirling like storm clouds. I knew the fight was far from over, but something inside me had shifted. They had pushed me to the edge, and now I was ready to push back. I whispered into the darkness, "You wanted war. Now you have it." The Monday after that brutal weekend, I woke with my heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. I had barely slept, but I dressed anyway. Gray slacks, my old nurse's shoes, a thick sweater Henry had given me one Christmas years ago. Something in my bones told me it was time to stop waiting for the next blow and start striking back. I slipped the torn loan forms I had rescued from the trash into my handbag. My hands shook, but not from fear, from fury. Downtown Detroit was buzzing when I stepped off the bus. Skyscraper windows reflected the weak November sun, traffic horns blared, and the wind whipped cold off the river. I pulled my coat tighter and walked into a building I hadn't entered in nearly 6 years. The brass letters on the door read, "Daniels and Harris Attorneys at Law." My heart clenched as I pushed the glass open. Daniels had been Henry's friend since they were both boys. I hadn't spoken to him since Henry's funeral, when grief had swallowed me whole. Inside the office smelled of paper coffee and old carpet. Mr. Daniels looked older than I remembered, white hair, thinner glasses perched lower on his nose, but when he saw me, his eyes softened. "Lorraine," he said, rising slowly from his chair. "It has been too long." He guided me to a seat, his hand warm on my arm, and listened as I poured everything out. The overheard whispers, the forged documents, the threats, the way Marcus had gripped my wrist. My voice trembled but did not break. When I finished, Mr. Daniels leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I wondered if Henry ever told you," he said quietly. I frowned. Told me what Mr. Daniels opened a drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. Inside were papers stamped with Henry's name. My breath caught. These are the updated deeds and his final will. Henry gave them to me in 2016 after his diagnosis. He wanted a backup in case anyone ever tried to challenge you. My fingers shook as I flipped through the pages. The house wasn't just in my name, it was in a trust Henry had set up ironclad against transfer without my consent. A clause stood out in bold. In the event of coercion, fraud, or undue influence, all rights of potential heirs shall be void. Tears blurred my eyes. Henry had known. He had seen the danger long before I had, and he had built a shield around me. Mr. Daniels slid another paper toward me. And here is more. Henry left instructions. If anyone attempted to force you out, I was to intervene. You still have full authority. My shoulders shook as relief and rage collided inside me. Marcus and Tasha thought I was powerless, but I had been holding a sword this whole time without knowing it. I told Mr. Daniels about the forged signature the pressure to sign over power of attorney. He nodded grimly. That is criminal. We can act. But Lorraine, you must be ready for war. His words rang inside me. War. I was ready. When I left his office, the cold air slapped my cheeks awake. For the first time in months, I walked with my spine straight. I wasn't just fighting to keep a roof over my head. I was fighting to honor Henry's trust, to protect the years of sweat and sacrifice poured into that house. My enemies weren't strangers, they were my blood, but that made the betrayal even more poisonous, and it made my resolve even harder. That night back at home, I said nothing. I cooked stew, set the table, and watched as Tasha scrolled on her phone and Marcus barked into his headset about closing deals. They thought I was beaten, but inside my mind was clear and sharp as glass. I remembered Henry's last words, remembered every scar I had earned. I had something they did not expect proof, legality, ironclad truth. Later, when they went upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table with Henry's photo and whispered, "You gave me the tools, Henry. Now I will use them." My hands stopped trembling. My fear curdled into steel. Tomorrow I would start gathering evidence. Tomorrow I would show them just how dangerous it is to underestimate a woman who has lost everything but refuses to bow. Thanksgiving arrived with the bitter chill of late November, the kind of cold that sneaks through cracks in the windows and bites at your bones. The house smelled of roasting turkey cinnamon and tension so thick you could chew it. Tasha had insisted on hosting her in-laws this year. I knew why an audience. They wanted me cornered in front of witnesses shamed into compliance. What they didn't know was that I had prepared my own stage. I wore a navy dress. Henry had always loved pearls around my neck, my hair neatly pulled back. In my handbag lay a stack of documents in crisp plastic sleeves, the trust papers, Henry's hidden clause, the forged loan forms I had rescued from the trash, and even a USB drive Mr. Daniels helped me prepare with audio recordings from our last meeting. Every step I took down the hallway toward that dining room felt like marching to battle. The table was set with fine china borrowed from me but claimed as theirs. Marcus carved the turkey with theatrical flair, his booming laugh filling the room as he poured wine. Tasha flitted between guests, playing the dutiful hostess. Her smile stretched too tight. Keisha was there too, perched like a vulture at the end of the table. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect night. When everyone was seated, Tasha tapped her glass with a fork. "Mama, Marcus and I have something important to share." She looked at me, her eyes gleaming. "We've decided it's time for you to move into assisted living. It will be better for you, safer." The room went quiet. A cousin coughed. Someone shifted uncomfortably. My face burned, but I kept my voice steady. "Oh, and where do you expect me to live?" Marcus smirked, slicing another piece of turkey. "We've already listed the house, got some great offers." The laughter of a few guests trickled nervously, but it died quickly when they saw my expression. My chest ached, but my voice rang out clear. "You listed a house that doesn't belong to you." A murmur rippled through the table. Tasha stiffened. "Mama, please don't cause a scene." I rose slowly, my knees steady despite the tremor running through my veins. "A scene." "No, sweetheart. This is called the truth." I reached into my handbag and pulled out the folder, laying it flat in the center of the table. Plastic sleeves glistened under the chandelier light. Mr. Daniels had labeled everything carefully. Deed and Trust, 2016. Will and Final Clause notarized. Forged Loan Application, Exhibit A. I slid the papers across the table one by one, like a blackjack dealer revealing the winning hand. Guests craned their necks to read. Keisha's mouth fell open. Marcus's face drained of color. I said, "You tried to steal what your father and I built with our hands. You tried to brand me incompetent to bury me while I still breathe. But Henry saw you coming. He protected me, and now I have the law on my side." The silence was deafening until Marcus slammed his fist on the table. "This is nonsense! You can't prove anything!" His voice cracked, betraying the panic lacing through. I clicked the USB drive into the small speaker Mr. Daniels had insisted I bring. A recording played Marcus's own voice low and venomous. "Sign or regret it." The words echoed through the dining room like a curse. Gasps erupted around the table. Tasha shot up from her chair, face pale. "Mama, stop! You'll ruin everything!" Her hands trembled, her perfect hostess mask shattered. I looked her dead in the eyes. "No, Tasha. You ruined yourself. You chose greed over blood." Then came the sound boots on the porch, a firm knock on the front door. Every head turned. Marcus stumbled back as two officers stepped inside, badges gleaming. Mr. Daniels followed his presence calm and steady. He nodded at me before addressing the officers. "You'll find evidence of fraud, coercion, and attempted financial exploitation here." Marcus tried to bluster his words, tumbling over each other. "This is a mistake, we were just—" But the officers cut him off, reciting rights as they cuffed him in front of everyone. Keisha bolted for the kitchen, but was stopped by another officer entering through the back. Tasha collapsed into her chair, shaking her head, muttering, "No, no, this can't be happening." I stood tall, though my heart pounded so hard I thought it might break my ribs. For years, they had treated me like a burden, a shadow. Tonight, I was the storm. I leaned forward, my voice calm, but carrying through the stunned silence. "This house is mine. My life is mine, and no one, not even my own daughter, will strip me of that again." The chandelier light flickered above us, glasses rattled as if the house itself was exhaling after years of suffocation. I felt Henry there with me, his promise alive in every brick. The audience they had invited had witnessed not my humiliation, but their downfall. And in that moment, I realized the war was no longer mine to fight. Justice had already taken its place at the table. The morning after Thanksgiving felt different. The house was quiet, almost reverent, as if it had witnessed everything and was finally at peace. Sunlight poured through the lace curtains, painting the hardwood floor with soft golden squares. For the first time in years, I sipped my coffee without a knot in my stomach. But outside these walls, the storm was just beginning for them. Marcus spent the night in county jail, and by sunrise, the news had already traveled. Local reporters camped outside the courthouse, microphones poised. The charge sheet was long attempted financial exploitation, forgery, coercion, and fraud. When he shuffled into arraignment in an orange jumpsuit, the swagger was gone. His head hung low, jaw clenched tight. The same man who once stood in my kitchen with a beer bottle whispering threats now trembled before a judge. Bail was denied. Too much evidence, too much risk. Tasha tried to distance herself immediately. She posted online about being blindsided, painting herself as the victim of Marcus's manipulation. But the documents told a different story. Her name appeared on co-signed forms, her handwriting clear in the margins. When the bank investigator testified that she had personally tried to open a line of credit in my name, her excuses fell flat. She was fired from her teaching job within days. Parents did not want a woman accused of defrauding her own mother near their children. Keisha fared no better. Officers found her fingerprints on the forged loan papers. She confessed quickly under pressure, hoping for leniency, but her betrayal cut deepest. She had always called me Auntie Eaton at my table, laughed in my kitchen. Now she sat across from detectives, spilling details about late-night planning sessions, about Marcus's obsession with flipping my house for profit. In exchange for cooperation, she got probation instead of prison. But her name was ruined. The community she once leaned on now turned its back. Neighbors stopped me on the street, their voices full of sympathy and admiration. "Lorraine, we had no idea. You're stronger than all of them put together." Church friends brought casseroles, flowers, warm embraces. For so long I had felt invisible, but now I was seen not as a frail old woman, but as a survivor who had faced down her own blood and refused to break. The trial came in February. Snow fell outside the courthouse, melting into gray slush, while inside the courtroom, the air crackled with tension. I sat with Mr. Daniels beside me, clutching Henry's old pocket watch in my palm. Across the aisle, Tasha wept silently while Marcus stared at the floor. The prosecutor laid out everything: the recordings, the forged documents, Keisha's testimony. Piece by piece, their scheme unraveled until even the jury shook their heads in disgust. When the verdict was read guilty on all counts for Marcus, guilty of conspiracy and fraud for Tasha, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Marcus received 7 years in state prison. Tasha was sentenced to 2 years suspended with mandatory community service and restitution. She sobbed when the judge said the words, but I did not move. My tears had already been spent in the years she betrayed me. The fallout rippled further. Marcus's business partners severed ties, his accounts frozen, his reputation shattered. Tasha returned to a neighborhood that no longer welcomed her. She walked past whispering neighbors' mailboxes stuffed with overdue bills, doors that no longer opened to her knock. Karma had not only come knocking, it had moved in and redecorated. As for me, I reclaimed my house piece by piece. I changed the locks, repainted the walls, scrubbed every surface until the stench of their greed was gone. I donated Tasha's abandoned belongings to charity. The nursery she once dreamed of became my library shelves lined with books I had never had time to read before. Each evening, I sat by the fireplace with Henry's photo and whispered, "We won, love. We won." The most unexpected consequence came one Sunday when my pastor asked if I would speak at service. He wanted me to share my story about betrayal, resilience, and justice. Standing at the pulpit, the congregation staring back with tear-filled eyes, I felt stronger than I ever had. My voice did not shake when I said, "Do not ever let anyone, even your own flesh and blood, convince you that your worth can be signed away on a piece of paper." The applause thundered through the church, and in that moment, I knew their attempt to erase me had done the opposite. It had carved my strength into stone, made my dignity unshakable. Marcus lost his freedom, Tasha lost her reputation, Keisha lost her community, and me, I gained my life back. Spring came early that year. By March, the dogwoods in Detroit were already budding, soft petals trembling in the breeze like tiny promises. I opened the windows of the house, letting in fresh air, listening to the birdsong that had once been drowned out by arguments and slammed doors. The silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Every morning I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Marcus once threatened me, the same one where Tasha tried to shame me. Now it was just mine. Sunlight streaming across its surface, Henry's photograph watching over me. I kept the papers from Mr. Daniels locked safely away, not because I needed them anymore, but because they reminded me that foresight and loyalty can outlive betrayal. Neighbors often stopped by with pies or just to chat. The woman across the street, Mrs. Thompson, helped me plant tulips in the yard. A retired veteran named Paul fixed the squeaky front gate for free. Their kindness washed over me, reminding me that family is not only bound by blood, it is built by respect, by presence, by love freely given. I took up painting, something I had abandoned decades ago when bills and responsibilities consumed my time. I filled canvases with colors I hadn't touched in years. Deep blues, fiery reds, hopeful greens. The nursery, Tasha once claimed, became my art room, the walls splattered with joyful accidents and bold strokes. It felt like reclaiming not just the house, but parts of myself I had long buried. As months passed, people asked if I ever spoke to Tasha. The truth, she wrote letters from her mandated community service pages filled with apologies and explanations. Sometimes I read them, sometimes I tucked them away. Forgiveness is complicated. I could not pretend the scars weren't there, but I could choose not to let them poison me further. Healing, I realized, wasn't about erasing the wound. It was about living proudly with the scar. Marcus never wrote. From what I heard, prison hardened him, stripped him of the arrogance he once carried like a crown. That was his path, to walk, not mine to watch. Keisha tried to visit once, but I told her gently at the door, "I wish you well, but my peace is not something I'll gamble again." She nodded, eyes wet, and left without a word. One quiet evening in June, I hosted a small gathering at my home. Just church friends, neighbors, a few women from my old nursing shifts. We shared potluck dishes. Laughter hymns hummed around the piano. At the end, I stood heart-pounding and told them what I had learned, that dignity is not negotiable, that boundaries are not cruelty but survival, and that self-respect is the inheritance we owe ourselves no matter what others try to take. The room erupted in applause, but what stayed with me was the look in the eyes of a woman named Ruth, newly widowed, who whispered afterward, "You gave me courage to stand up to my own children." That was when I understood the real revenge wasn't just winning against my daughter and her husband. It was transforming my pain into a lantern for others. Today, when I walk through my house, every creak in the floorboards feels like Henry's steady footsteps beside me. I tend the tulips, finish a painting, call a friend just to listen. I no longer fear being discarded because I know my worth is rooted deep, immovable. They tried to sell my life like a piece of property, but what I owned was never just wood and brick. It was memory, sacrifice, resilience, and those cannot be stolen. So to anyone listening, especially those of you in your 50s, 60s, 70s, remember this. You are not a burden. You are not disposable. Stand firm. Gather evidence. Speak your truth. And if they try to write you out of your own story, pick up the pen and write the ending yourself. Because justice is not always swift, but it comes. And when it does, the light it leaves behind is brighter than the darkest betrayal.